We'd like to welcome you all to the second in our health education series. Today's presentation is on e-cigarettes and vaping, and it's presented by our education coordinator, Lee Livermore. Many of you already know Lee and what a great job he does, and so I'll bet you're very eager to get started. But before I turn the mic over to Lee, a few housekeeping tips, if you would, please. All of your microphones on our end are muted throughout the presentation, and if you would please make sure that yours are as well. I thank you to that person who just switched theirs off. In consideration of time, we are not going to be holding a discussion segment, but rather we encourage you to email Lee or email me with any questions you may have following the webinar. Our contact information will be included at the very end of the webinar, so if you don't have our information, you'll find it there. Also, immediately following the webinar, you will receive an email from Darlene Marco, our administrative person, which will include a link to a quick survey. And that information will help provide us for future planning. And I ask each of you to please take the survey ASAP so that that task is not buried in your pile of to-do things. And the information that you provide us is very important for feedback so we can help plan and gauge our next webinars. Currently at our website at www.upstatepoison.org, which is included on your screen right now, under the word updates on our homepage, the very first section is dedicated there to Poison Prevention Week, and it's around the topic of vaping. So listed there, you're going to find two handouts on vaping. One is for parents and one is for teen. Both are available for your use. And so whether you choose to print and distribute it or whether you want to post the link at your website or the flyer at the website, please share you can share the PDF certainly with program partners by email or whatever. We appreciate any help that you can provide in spreading the word. The PDFs will print out as an 8.5 by 11 copy paper size, and we hope that you will find them useful. So let us know. Let us know if you're using them, if you find them useful, if there's any things that you might add. We need to keep in touch to keep this relationship going. Within the next few days, the presentation will be archived at our website on our homepage under the update section as well. So I think that's about it, unless, Lee, you have anything else to add. And thanks for listening, and I will now turn the program over to Lee.
Great. Well, welcome, everyone. So excited that you'll be sharing in the presentation today. This is brought to you by the Upstate New York Poison Center. And we want to encourage everyone to remember to have the number for the Poison Center available. And if you need education materials, stickers, magnets, brochures, then you'll be able to call the Poison Center or email me, and I'll be happy to mail you out some materials. And one of the ways that you can stay in touch with the Poison Center and make sure that you're always taking us with you is to program your cell phones with the number of the Poison Center. And this is also great information to share with your client. So we're here to talk about e-cigarettes and vaping and the facts and the myths about it. This topic has just become almost at an epidemic level, depending on who you're talking to. At the Upstate New York Poison Center, it's almost a daily occurrence that I receive calls to come out into the community and do programs on vaping and e-cigarettes. And the focus predominantly is with middle and high school students. Staff and school superintendents and parents are all asking for this information because they have very limited knowledge as to what the Poison Center is about. I thought I was going to say Sean tells him that. So, moving on to to the next part of our presentation, there's three main learning objectives that I'm going to be covering today. Is that first is you'll be able to describe how e-cigarettes and vaping devices work, and then more importantly, understand how they have evolved. You'll also be able to understand the public health dangers of cigarettes, and then hopefully you'll be able to explain to teens and parents the health risks of e-cigarettes and vaping. So for anyone that continues to join us, if you could please click on your microphone and mute yourself. That'll help make it easier for everybody to learn about the program today. One of the most fascinating facts that I learned from Michelle Peace of the University of Virginia Commonwealth is that when we think of the history of e-cigarettes, we tend to think of the versions that are available today in 2019. But the original version started way back almost 90 plus years ago. And as it began to evolve, the history of e-cigarettes were really developed by a pharmacist in China in 2003. And the whole purpose of that was this pharmacist's father had died from cancer as a result of smoking combustible tobacco. Well, the product started, the research was in motion, and it spread within a very short time to Europe and then to the United States. So you can see in almost a 4 to 5 or 6 year period, it has blossomed now into almost a $23 billion industry. And we want to keep that in mind because when we're looking at why is it so popular, well, people are making money from it and they're sharing very limited information. So what exactly is vaping or juuling? Vaping can be defined as the act of inhaling a vapor from e-liquid, which is usually through some form of a personal vaporizer. So here's a picture of a gentleman, and this is more of a modern version, much larger, can handle a lot more e-juice and higher levels of nicotine. So when we look at the construction of e-cigarettes, from the very basic beginning, is that it was a device that has a battery, a voltage control, heating coil, and then a chamber where the e-juice could come in contact with a heated coil, which would then turn the juice into a vaping, and then people would breathe it in. So, but unlike tobacco cigarettes, which burn tobacco, with these being battery powered, and also they've done one of the things is that they've removed all the undesirable elements of a tobacco cigarette. And that'll become evident as we move through the program today. So this is what really is called vaping. The bottom line of it is that you're getting nicotine into the lungs and then into your bloodstream and throughout your entire body. So how does an e-cigarette work? Well, this is really, really fascinating when you look at the technology. And the technology is something that is now with us and will be with us moving into the future. The technology just keeps evolving. So when we look at some of these devices, and I like to be clear to talk about that the term is ENDS, which is an electronic nicotine delivering system. And I'm kind of certain that this term will just be an electronic drug delivering system. As I'll show you later in the program, there are lots of other things other than the e-juice which are being used in these devices. So I have a very quick video here for you to show you how exactly the vaping devices work. Apologize for that. Okay. So that's pretty fascinating. And then here's a picture as we begin to look at this. And I'll show you very shortly the evolution of how we got to this particular point. And these are highly technological devices. And this appeals not only to the youth, but anyone who uses them, because you're not saddled with all of the other bad components of a tobacco cigarette. So when we look at some of the first generation of these devices, at first they made them so that they looked like an e-cigarette. They look like a cigarette. And then in the second generation, they started making more powerful batteries. They started adding bigger chambers to it, and then making it so it was more personalized device. So you could begin to see where it was even more of an attraction, because no longer did it look like a cigarette, but it looked like this really fun device that you could use.
Like a pen.
When we get to the third generation of these devices, you'll notice that the picture at the top left here, those are referred to as tanks. And the reason of that is that you have the chamber up on the top, and then this big part here is almost all battery. So the higher power battery and more concentration of the e-liquid would allow the user to breathe in deeper, longer, and more elements of the vaping device. The other pictures go to show you some coils, and this is a coil with the actual liquid sitting on it. And then in the fourth generation of these devices, we notice, if somebody could please mute their screen. Thank you.
I walked away and went, he's like, I'm like, you're infecting us.
So when we look at some of these other devices, these were used more for a term called dripping. And people that were using the first generation of the e-cigarette devices had found that if they could hack into the device, they could take it apart, they could increase battery power, they could increase the amount of liquid, and then they wanted to start dropping the actual juice directly onto the coils, and that became a term called dripping, which gave them higher levels of concentration. This was also part of the evolving to be able to use things like concentrated THC or even ground cannabis could be used in some of these devices.
I'm going to call him and find out.
Then in the fifth generation, you have this IQ's device in the upper left-hand corner, and then you'll notice how more attractive and more easy and more disguised these devices had become. So in the far right of the screen over here, this is called a Jouling device, and it's J-U-U-L. And it's the name of the product that actually has become moved it from a noun into a verb. So people use Jouling as the term for describing almost all of their vaping type behaviors. So when we look at the Joule device, and this is the one that has become most popular with middle and high school students, is that it looks like a flash drive. So it's very sleek, very easy to hide, and it has the pods which are filled with a variety of flavors. And so all they would have to do was insert the pod in the top of the device, and then they could hit a button. And this was in the fifth generation, that it no longer was the e-liquid coming in contact with the coils, but they actually changed the chemical structure from a nicotine to a nicotine salt. And by changing the structure to a salt, it has a lower temperature before it heats up and changes into a vapor. So the Joule device was now the most technologically advanced device. And it was so attractive because it also had another feature where the battery could be charged in a USB port in somebody's computer, laptop, or even a USB port charger. What most people didn't realize in the beginning was that each one of these pods would equal as much as 200 puffs or as much nicotine as a full package of cigarettes. So with that higher level of nicotine delivery, then we're beginning to understand how this was becoming popular. And I'll show you a little bit more about the nature of nicotine and how it affects the human brain. But let's look at how they were marketed to teens. And when we look at it, they use the exact same methodologies that the big tobacco companies use to market their products of tobacco to kids, youth, and anyone who entered the store. And more importantly, it's at eye level. So all of their advertisements, all of the availability of the product is the first thing that a young person or an adult encounters when they go into a store to buy these particular products. Now, making them colorful, bright, full of flavors. This was really an unconscious way of being able to say, hey, here's a great product, why don't you try it? So I'll share a brief story that I went into a convenience store on my way to do a presentation. And when I got to the counter, there were about 3 or 4 cash registers. And at one of the cash registers behind the cashier, there was a great big sign hanging from the ceiling that talked about tobacco products and how dangerous they are, and nicotine and how it's addictive. It was in great big letters. You could read it very clearly. And then over behind one of the other cashiers, there was a very small sign that said vaping devices can be harmful. But to be honest with you, I couldn't read it just by standing at the counter. So when we're looking at how they're treating these products, and they're not on the same level. So we know tobacco causes cancer and lots of other health problems. We're still not fully researched and know the full effects of what the Jouling device is. And one of the main reasons is these devices are not regulated by the federal government. So they're not required to tell you what is in the product, how the product is manufactured, and it really gives them a lot of free rein with their advertising. So what are one of the reasons? They come up with lots of different things. So people post videos on YouTube, and it's been proven that the Joule device, and in particular, the company that manufactures it, had targeted both Snapchat and Instagram for targeting youth. And they put a lot of advertisement, millions of dollars into advertising to that particular population. And if you happen to see some of the newer ads, now they're being a little bit more forthcoming. They're saying nicotine is addictive, but they're showing adults that are transitioning from tobacco into vaping devices. And that's also one of the main selling points, is that people say vaping is safer than tobacco. And to some degree, it's true. But let's examine that a little bit more. That when we look at the differences here, that we say, geez, I know that a cigarette looks like that, it smells like that, I have to burn it, but look how cool that the slim, sleek device that I can use, and nobody's going to know the difference. We know that tobacco stinks, it smells. You have firsthand, secondhand, and even a new term that they're coming out with is called third-hand nicotine exposure. And this is the nicotine that accumulates whether somebody is smoking in a car or in their home, and it gets on their furniture, in their clothes, and their fingernails. Actually, when they engage another person, they're transferring the carcinogens that are in tobacco products to another person. So it's just taken another level of adding first-hand, second-hand, and third-hand exposures. So how are they marketed to teenagers? This is a great booklet that's put out by the American Academy of Pediatrics, and it's all about the flavor trap, is that they know kids love things that taste good, and adults too. But by promoting these products with the vast amount of flavors, and I think at last check, there were over 7,000 different flavors available that people could use and make in their e-juices. So when we look at, it looks like candy. These are actual bottles of the vaping juice and the size that it comes in. And they have really catchy names and just about absolutely every flavor that you could possibly imagine. Every candy, maple, creme brulee, every dessert flavor is now being called an e-juice. And one of the particular points about this is that the federal government is now beginning to identify that actually the most damage caused by the vaping devices is the result of the flavoring that is used in the e-juice. So this might be a little surprise to some of you, but to even make this more attractive and healthier, there's a product called e-cigs. And in this particular one, it was like, hey, I can get my vitamins, I can get my caffeine, and I can get my nicotine all with a single vaping device. So they're really blurring the lines. Is this really safe for somebody? And the marketing is just all open to it. Again, let me repeat, these products are not regulated by the federal government. So when we look at vaping devices, and so if we were to show teenagers today what some of the old tobacco commercials looked like, they are really disgusted. So I'm going to show you a couple of them. And I think that you'll be able to share the sentiment with the kids. I do apologize. It appears that the sound is not coming through, and I definitely apologize for that. But we'll include the ability to have access to these videos afterwards. I tried one other thing, and I hope that the videos will come through for you. My apologies. So when we're looking at how they're marketed to kids, there's three people that I call people of the lie. And the first person of the lie is going to be the friends of the kids that try these devices. Anyone who usually does some sort of risky behavior and does not really consider consequences is introduced to something because of their friends. So whether it's tobacco, alcohol, or drugs, everyone will usually be introduced to it by their friends. And that is the first person in the lie because their friends have no idea what is in these vaping devices. They have no idea what the long-term effects are. They're just the ones that say, hey, this is cool, and I think it's fun. And the second person in the lie is the person who tries it. All of us, by human nature, lie to ourselves. We think that we say we're going to get up and work out in the morning. We say that we're going to make sure that we start eating healthier. Or we'll convince ourselves and say, no, this won't hurt me. It may bother somebody else, but it's not going to hurt me. And the truth of it is that we tend to lie to ourselves. And then the third person of the lie is the people that sell and manufacture these products. because you will get the truth in this webinar today, but you will not get the truth from the person who is selling you these products. They're not going to tell you that this will cause potential lung damage. They're not going to tell you that you could get dependent and possibly addicted to the flavors and the nicotine. They're not going to also be there that if somebody does develop a respiratory problem, that later on in life, that they're going to show up and say, I'll pay your medical bills. None of that will ever happen. But what they will tell you is they will customize flavors to make it just to your particular preference. They will help you pick out the device that is most attractive to you. And more importantly, the reason they want you to become addicted is because they want your money. That's a money-based business. Let me repeat again, a $23 billion industry was created in almost less than a decade. So this is a very, very big concern because people are sold on the idea, if it tastes good and it's only water and it's vape, how can it be harmful to me? And so as we move on to some of these other pieces, I want to also point out that a new term that we could be able to recognize these with is that these are addiction for profit industries. And so what I mean by that, alcohol is legal and it's for profit. Tobacco and vaping products, legal for profit. We're entering in an age of looking at medical and recreational marijuana, and this is just adding more complexity to caregivers and people in the prevention field for helping to make sure that public health is a safe place. So when we look at this industry and the real cost is that this is a infographic put out by the FDA, is that more than 350,000 youths between the ages of 11 and 18 are trying cigarettes. And if they're trying cigarettes, they're also trying some of these other products. So we know that we've done a great job in public health of almost bringing teen smoking to zero. And then all of a sudden the vaping industry popped up, and now we're seeing such a huge insurge that at the developing brain of a young teenager, they can't really begin to understand the consequences of some of their behavior. So when we look at what are the long-term risks of ENDS and e-cigarettes, well, this was a study that was put out by the American Academy of Engineering, Science, and Medicine. And they reviewed over 800 scientific articles, and they came out with these pieces about myths and facts, that people promote e-cigarettes are safe. And the truth is, it's an unregulated product. E-cigarettes don't have nicotine. Almost every product that they put through scientific testing found traces of nicotine or very high levels of nicotine. And then the other one is people say, well, it's going to help me quit smoking. And that might be true. So one of our toxicologists, Dr. Willie Eggleston, and I were having a conversation one day, and he said, Lee, let me make sure I'm clear about this, is that someone who has been a long-term tobacco smoker, if they go to a vaping device, it could be less harmful to them because they're not going to get all the tar and nicotine of burning a product and breathing it in. But then you have a youth that may have never smoked a cigarette in their life, and then they start vaping. And he says that is a whole different level of problems, especially with a developing body and a developing brain. So this is a very mixed message that we as prevention providers need to be able to address when we're looking at how do I share this information. So what are the long-term risks of ENDS and e-cigarettes? The bottom line is we don't know. We are beginning to discover that there are some respiratory problems, there are dependency, some people are addicted, and it is causing some problems with lungs and other health issues. So the federal government is not going to regulate these products until the year 2022. And this was a successful effort put out by the vaping lobbyists that were able to get them to put off any passing legislation on this for another 3 years. So it took the federal government greater than 50 years before they put on packaging that cigarettes are harmful and can cause cancer. Do we have another 50 years that we can wait for our teenagers to grow up to find out that it was bad for them and they are going to have some respiratory problems down the road? So what we know is less harmful doesn't mean harmless, or it doesn't mean that it's safe to use. So what's in the e-liquid and what makes it so harmful? Well, there's nicotine, ultrafine particles, diacetyl, which is a chemical that's related to serious lung disease, volatile organic compounds. So these are chemicals made in a laboratory that are put together and then they're heated up. And when you have that, you're going to have problems because when chemicals are heated up, they change their structure, especially when you're going from a liquid to a vape, and then that gets put into the body. So even cancer-causing chemicals and heavy metals. With the e-juice coming in contact with the coils in the pictures I showed you earlier, that you have such things as nickel, tin, and lead are some of the heavy metals that are being absorbed into the lungs and into the bloodstream. When we look at nicotine content, here's an idea that shows that a traditional cigarette can contain up to 30 milligrams of nicotine, but sometimes it has less. And when somebody is smoking a cigarette, they breathe it in and they breathe it out. So they're not getting the full concentration. And then we have gums and lozenges, which help somebody if they're trying to quit tobacco. And then you have chewing tobacco and nicotine patches. But then when we look at electronic cigarettes, they are right at the same level as a traditional cigarette. And then in those little refillable bottles, it has as much as 240 milligrams of nicotine in each bottle. So just imagine somebody that they have now become dependent upon vaping and they use an entire bottle in the course of a day. This is more nicotine than anybody has ever consumed, even when they were using combustible products. So when we look at some of the problems that happen with it, dependence, cardiovascular, cancer, respiratory diseases, and even oral diseases, that it's been reported that nicotine is a vasoconstrictor, and our mouths need the saliva to stay healthy. So when somebody is using the vaping devices, they're actually causing their mouth to dry out. And when it dries out, it becomes a breeding ground for bacteria and the potential that the vascular system is being constricted and healing white blood cells are not able to get to the mouth and to our sinus systems. So nosebleeds, reduction of gums, and dental problems, and even tongue problems are now showing up in people that are chronic vapors. So what they also don't tell you is all the chemicals that they use to make the e-juice, and some of those chemicals are the same chemicals that they use to make antifreeze. And the flavoring chemicals can be diacetyl or diethylene glycol, and it's just a whole host of chemicals that were never intended to be in the human body. So some of the chemicals, when they're heated up, they actually change into a formaldehyde. And I know that this isn't an attractive picture, but this is a jar of formaldehyde, which is actually embalming fluid, and it's a preservative. So someone who doesn't know what's in the e-juice and is vaping it, they're actually getting some of these chemicals into their lungs and then into their bloodstream. And then the most important thing, but they're going to say, this tastes good. And that was one of the tricks in the marketing is if we remove all the undesirables, then they will never know what is happening to their body.
Oh, you got all the people.
I have the people.
So when we look at the substances that are used in this, is that the same chemicals that are used to create skin lotion or food additives are propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin. And these are products which are legal and we consume through eating and drinking, but they were never designed to be heated up and then breathed into the system. So it's just one more level of the chemicals that they use in these products to disguise the taste, the smell, and also because it lubricates their throat, they're not getting the harshness in their throat that somebody would from smoking a typical tobacco product. So how does it affect the brain? I love the human brain. I think it's the most amazing organ that we have in the human body. So the one message that's so important to share, and this is for everybody, is that you have one brain and one life. And everything that you put into your body ends up going into the brain, and then it interacts with how the brain communicates with the rest of the body. So most people think I'm only breathing this in and breathing it out, and it's only vape, it's not hurting me. Well, there's three things in the human body, three things that every cell in the human body needs, and that's water, oxygen, and nutrition. And every time we substitute one of those items, it doesn't just stay in one part of our body, such as our stomach or our digestive tract or our lungs, but it actually goes into every single cell throughout the entire body. When we look at the brain and how vulnerable it is, the brain actually becomes very quickly sensitized to nicotine. And nicotine, once we start that developmental process, it actually begins to lead people down the road that they maybe might be more prone for risky behavior because of the chemicals that it releases in the brain. So if they get a buzz from nicotine, they might look for something else that's going to give them that same feeling. So chemicals like nicotine are a neurotoxin, and they actually inhibit the brain development and communication. So when we're looking at chemicals like nicotine, and as they're entering in their body, now our neurons are how our body communicates with each other. It sends signals, and then it tells the body to think things, to feel things, to do things that we do unconsciously because it goes down through the entire central nervous system. So when we start interrupting that communication process, we're not just beginning to do some problems that might give us a feeling of fuzziness in our head, but we're actually impacting the entire body. So when we look at 90% of all addictions that start in the teenage years, and this is both good and bad. So let's look at this in the positive term, that if you have kids that are taught to say please and thank you, and they hold the door open for somebody, or they have really good study habits, and they make really good decisions, those are really positive behaviors that are going to stay with them for the rest of their life. The reason why 90% addictions start in the teenage years is because of the development part of the brain. The brain develops between predominantly the ages of 13 to 25, and some of the newer studies are actually proving the brain is still developing up until the age of 30. So the last part of the brain to develop is the frontal lobes, which is where executive decision making happens. And during this teenage years, the body is creating new neurons, and then it prunes them back. So it opens up their world to new experiences, and then when they no longer use those experiences, the brain begins to prune it back. So during this growth period of their body and their brain, anytime somebody does something to interrupt that process, they're really putting themselves at risk for the consequences that could come down the road. So I love this particular statement. And it's pretty much that I don't think anybody wakes up and says, today's the day I'm going to be an addict. Today's the day I'm going to get addicted to nicotine. Or today's the day that I'm going to be addicted to alcohol or some other type of drug. Part of it is that once they start it and they become dependent, it has the potential of leading to addiction, and then they can't stop. So I'm going to, hopefully this particular video will play again, but I'll describe it ahead of time. This is some true confessions by some teenagers in California talking about their experiences with vaping.
I play baseball, basketball, and play football. Those are the 3 sports that I play big time. When I first started vaping, I just turned 15 years old, so I've been doing it for about a year now. All my teammates do it. It's just pretty normal for everybody to do it.
People that I know that do it, they're like good students, like straight A's. It's a normal thing to do. I was 13 the first time I vaped.
People at my high school, they would vape on the bus just because it's like so easy to hide. It's just like a little like black pen. I could just vape at home, like, and my parents don't know at all.
When I'm riding my bike, like far distances, it makes me feel like I'm riding away. And the reason I vape is to basically get away and get my mind off of things. I was 13 years old when I vaped for the first time. I started buying $5 vaporizers, and from there, I moved on to bigger ones.
Most of my friends that vape, they use nicotine. A lot of nicotine, actually. Like, because you can put as much nicotine into it as you want. Like, the concentrates can go way past just cigarettes.
There's too many flavors to count. There are endless amounts that you can get.
There's cotton candy, bubblegum, peppermint.
Some that taste like pancakes, coffee flavor.
I heard one was unicorn puke. It sounds like cartoon flavors or something.
It makes them seem a little bit more kid-friendly, so people are, like, okay with doing it.
Some of my friends, they're sponsored by vape companies. They just get sent stuff for free, because then they, like, make YouTube videos of all the tricks that they're doing, and they're like, oh, this is the juice I'm using, this is the mod I'm using.
A lot of people post them on their Snapchat stories or on Instagram of them vaping. They tend to be more popular.
I can look up vape and a whole bunch of videos will come up and I can see what kind of cool tricks they're doing, learn what the name is, and I can go look it up on YouTube about how to do it.
It's the whole culture. It's kind of a big deal for a lot of people that I know.
Sometimes I do feel pressured into vaping. With all this social media nowadays, it has a really big effect on what people just think about you.
If you don't vape, you're looked at as an outsider, so everybody does it.
I think people that you would never expect would definitely be vapors. It's becoming like more and more popular.
Vaping is considered cool in my group of friends. It might just be the fact that you're doing something you shouldn't be doing.
There's no worry that our parents are going to find us vaping on social media. We've gotten really good at hiding it from our parents.
I know I'm underage, but it's just something that I do. I won't let it affect my future.
So that's a pretty impressive video when we hear it directly from kids that have started vaping and the reasons why they continue to vape. When I do presentations for middle and high school kids, I really tell them it takes a lot of courage to be the one that says no and to not try to go down this path, because they truly do not know what is in the product and they don't know the long-term consequences. So here's one more video that is bringing it more down to a middle school level, and I think it's going to be really quite eye-opening because it really could be any one of our kids that are doing this.
Tried the brain freeze.
Now, brain freeze sounds disgusting.
You know what? Sour gummy worms.
Oh, I love it. It's so good. You guys have to try it.
What about dragon's blood?
I feel like that'd be like a champion.
You just missed the tobacco industry's latest scam.
Have you guys tried the brain freeze?
Because you were supposed to.
Disgusting. You know what,
Sour gummy worms.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. It's so good.
Do you want some?
Sure.
So this is really designed to show us that there's so much going on around us, and with the advent of technology, that kids have more information available to them, and they're not getting the correct information. They think that they want this instant gratification, and it's right available to them just at their fingertips or at school or with a friend. When we look at the overall health effects of nicotine, it can cause headaches, nausea, dizziness, loss of breath, and collapse or even unconsciousness. Nicotine exposure is a toxic exposure, and more importantly, it's a poison. So when we look at some of the side effects that people don't think about, it dries their skin out. It can lead to gum disease. It can cause burning or sensations on their face, itchiness, puffy eyes, sensitivity to other caffeines, and even minor bloody nose issues. It could lead to long-term possible bronchitis because you're impacting the lungs and your ability of the lungs to function normally. When we look at the overall respiratory system, it is so incredibly easy to see how complex it is and how important it is that everything in our entire body is designed to keep us in balance and to keep us healthy. And so when someone is vaping and jouling and bringing in these chemicals into their body, it's their nasal system, their nose, their mouth, the trachea, the bronchitis, the bronchial lobes, their lungs, and then it transfers to every part of their body. So here was a true story. It hit all of the news outlets that this 18-year-old young woman in Florida started vaping, and within 3 months, she ended up with hypersensitivity pneumosis. So basically a condition they call wet lung. And with this, she was unable to get enough oxygen into her body. So they required that she not only went into the hospital, but they had to insert tubes in her lungs to drain off of the liquids that were accumulating. So one of the diseases that's caused by vaping is a thing called popcorn lung. And popcorn lung basically is a scarring of the lungs and the bronchiole tubes. So if you notice this area right here in the circle, just before the alveoli sacs, that's the last part of our lungs where oxygen gets transferred into the blood system. And when you cause scarring anywhere on the human body, we know that it doesn't ever fix itself. And so someone is always taking the risk of scarring their lungs, which will never have the opportunity to repair themselves. So this is how the function of the alveolus in the lungs work. And I think that this is just one of the most amazing pieces, is that when we look at that it's only one cell thick, that as the capillaries surround these sacs, carbon dioxide is pushed out and new oxygen is put into the blood cells, and then it's carried out through the entire body. What an amazing ability that our body has to do this. And I think for the most part, people just take breathing for granted until you have a problem. Until somebody develops a respiratory problem, that's when the seriousness starts to happen. So can other substances be used in these vaping devices? Yeah, absolutely. And they're unlimited. So I have one more video to share with you to give you an idea as to what these products might be.
Broward County deputies come across this.
And he told me he paid $5 for that little bag, and the high that they get will last several hours.
This is Flocka, just one of the inexpensive synthetic drugs ravaging South Florida. And there's a new twist that's making fighting these drugs even harder. E-cigarettes, or vaporizer pens.
It's just a huge challenge. It's affecting our entire communities, from prevention to rehabilitation.
Lieutenant Ozzy Tianga says vaping drugs is so discreet, teens can do it right in school.
There's no scent. They sit in the back of the room and they think it's funny and they're vaping, and what they're vaping, I cannot determine.
It used to be that if you were trying to get high, it would smell.
Exactly. All of it has changed.
And that same secrecy makes it tough for police to know what's inside that vape pen. They have to get it tested by a lab. And you can't determine what's in it right away.
Not at all. In fact, these individuals can smoke it right in front of you.
A recent CDC study found that e-cigarette use more than tripled among middle school and high school students in 2014. It's not known how much of that is drug-related, but young vape users are posting videos of themselves getting high on YouTube.
Hey, my hair on fire. My hair on fire. Bro, you chill, man. That ain't nothing but a vape. My hair on fire.
The Drug Enforcement Administration is so concerned because synthetics can be so dangerous, no matter how they're ingested.
We've seen that time and time again where somebody has overdosed and died. There are a significant number of overdoses that are occurring related to these types of drugs.
All of this is so new, no one's keeping track. No one knows just how many people have been injured or have died from vaping synthetic drugs. But already emergency rooms are seeing an increase, and the stories are disturbing.
I have had patients in my practice in the emergency room that I have walked in on that are actually vaping at the bedside.
Dr. John Cunha says recently a patient was discharged after an overdose and went into a hospital bathroom on his way out of the hospital, vaped more drugs, and had to be taken back to the ER.
I think that these devices do have a role in helping people get off of actual cigarettes, and that they may be proven safer in that case. But in the hands of teenagers and drug abusers, they are definitely a very dangerous thing to have.
The thing to remember here, Jake, is that these are not classified as drug paraphernalia, so there's no federal age limit on who can buy them, although many states do have restrictions. But these shops are popping up everywhere, and not to mention they can easily be bought on the internet. Now, the industry says that vaping is a great thing for a lot of people, that it's helping people to quit smoking, not helping people to start smoking. They, of course, say everything is subject to abuse by drug addicts. And, of course, there is a study now that shows that many of these teens who are vaping, Jake, they have never smoked before. This is new to them.
Cargoers rate deals from great to overpriced.
Then sorts them so you see the best deals for.
Wait a minute. I apologize for this, just one moment. Okay. I guess the music isn't a bad thing. So this is true, and even our administrative director for the Upstate New York Poison Center, Michelle Kaliva, was sharing with me this morning that ketamine is now making a comeback in these vaping devices. And she was a bit shocked because it's an old-time type drug, but it just shows you that anything that's out there, any product in a liquid, a pill, a powder, can be converted into these e-juices and then be used in the vaping devices. So it's more than just flavoring and more than just nicotine. We've opened up the door that it is an unlimited level of products. So some of the other ones that potentially are dangerous is when we look at cannabis and CBD oil. CBD oil is unregulated. It comes from the hemp plant, which has very, very little, a 0.3 level of THC in it. But CBD oil is being promoted as curing everything from acne to asthma to anything out there. So it's really, really dangerous in the sense of what we're looking at and the products that are being used in these devices. So when we look at some of these other ones, such as oil, shatter, butter, wax, that these are all different concentrations of concentrated THC. So the oils, these are not syringes that somebody would put into a vein, but it's a syringe that somebody would put into a vaping device. Shatter is another form of concentrated THC that was used in a process that strips the THC off of the cannabis plant, and then you get high levels as high as 90+% THC. So it was never intended to be in the human body at those levels. And now with the technology of vaping devices, we've opened the door that something like this is a very real possibility. So how to talk to parents and teens about vaping is a really difficult thing. And more importantly, I went old school on this one. And some of you might remember Joe Friday from Dragnet. And it's just the facts. Now, I'm a parent of two young adults that are in college. And I've been talking to my kids all through growing up. And where I'm at with them now, I just share the facts. There's no sense in trying to scare them because that doesn't work. Kids today are so desensitized to the world that they're dealing with so many more serious issues like active shooter drills and lockdowns in schools. So when you have an adult saying, oh, this can hurt you, it really doesn't have the same level of impact. So if you just explain the facts to them and have them open up to have the conversation is what I have found to be a very great beginning in order to have the conversation. There's this other booklet put out by drugfree.org, and it gives a recap of what I've shared a lot in this presentation, and then things you need to know, and then how you go about talking with kids about vaping. This is going to be available as a link on our website in about a week after this presentation. So you'll be able to access the PowerPoint, you'll be able to access the videos, and you'll be able to access a whole host of resources on vaping after this particular webinar. So I like to ask the youth, is it worth risking their future? So here's a really important question, and I've been doing some research on this, is that very well-intended prevention professionals will talk to kids and say, well, in 10 or 20 years from now, this could cause a problem. Now, the difficulty with that is that if you're talking to a 13 to an 18-year-old, they really have a short lifespan. And so putting it more into a frame of 2 weeks or 6 months or a year from now, if they keep up a particular risky behavior, it could cause more problems. So like 6 months between a dental visit. What if they went to their next dental checkup and the dentist had to come in and say, you're receding, your gums are receding and you're going to lose your teeth? And we all know that our teeth are permanent, and once they're gone, they're gone. So I try to find the level that I can talk to kids at that's going to show them, is it really risking their future? Another phase is everybody wants to be the popular kid. So some of the new messages is the true popular kid is the one that has the courage to say no. The popular kid is the one who doesn't follow the crowd and doesn't do it just because everybody else is doing it, but they're making better decisions. We can't hide from the truth. And the truth is, vaping is bad. So in conclusion of today's webinar, one of our taglines at Upstate Medical University is, knowing changes everything. And in my presentations, I love to share with my audiences the question of, so what? You've invested your time to watch a webinar today. So what? What are you going to do with the information? Is this going to make you a better prevention professional? Will this help you talk to kids and maybe even people in your own family? I hope that it will. I hope that you'll take some of the items from today's presentation and begin to share it, even if it's in terms of how the lungs work or the fact that nicotine is a neurotoxin in the brain. Or maybe you're going to access some of the resources from the Upstate New York Poison Center's website, and then you'll be able to pass that on and share it with someone else. I truly hope that that's the case. And I want to thank you, most importantly, from Upstate Medical University, the Upstate New York Poison Center, and then you. Each one of our participants today have given the Poison Center what I consider two of the most precious gifts you could give anybody. And today, you have given us your time, and you have given us your attention. And we are truly, truly grateful for this. We hope that you enjoyed the webinar. We hope that you'll also follow up and do the survey that we will be sending out to you in an email. It's a very short survey, but we want to know how we can improve, and we want to know how we can make these events more valuable to you as professionals. So in the end, once again, I just want to thank you for being a part of today's seminar, and I hope that the rest of your day is a great day. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, there was no.